Good afternoon and welcome to the March 27th, 2024 Finance Committee meeting for the Lee Summit School District. We'll begin with item 1.01, contracts $15,000 and less. This list is standard for this time of year. You'll see contracts to reserve locations for prom and other events like that, DJs. Also, contracts for curricular resources for the upcoming school year, hotels for activities that are upcoming for some of our groups, our student groups who travel. Are there any questions about items that are on this list? All right, moving on then to 0.12, contracts greater than 15,000. All items on this list will be discussed in greater detail later in the meeting. There is one on here that's for renewal. Typically, renewals don't come forward for specific discussion. So, are there any discussions about the knee tool that is listed here? It will not come up later in the agenda. Okay. All right. Well, we will discuss all the other items later in the agenda. 1.03 was not on the list for contracts $15,000 or more, but we want to highlight this item because it came to the board in January as an approval, a grant approval for enhancement grant. Since that time, we've added $150,000 worth of requests to this grant application. And so we're bringing it back to the board again as an amended grant application. The enhancement grant, this is a reminder, is focused on career and technical education resources and will reimburse the district somewhere between 50 and 75% of our cost. If our allocation is reduced after the grant is awarded, then we will likely reduce we'll come back to the table and discuss it, but likely then reduce the amount of purchases that we have requested. Are there any questions about that? And just so you know, we have Dr. Bonison on here as well, but the $150,000 of increase are related to the aerospace program and I believe the fire science program that we're adding at Summit Tech. All right, if there are no questions, we'll move on to 1.04, character strong curriculum, and I will turn this over to Shelley Sanders.
Hello. So we're so happy to be here today to talk about Character Strong. In our prior CSIP or the current CSIP that we have now, one of the action steps in that CSIP was to look at an SEL curriculum. With some ESSER funds, and SEL curriculum was purchased for elementary, and that was Caring School Communities, and it was purchased right towards the beginning of COVID. And then there was a grant that was offered by Cerner that allowed the middle level to utilize second steps for 3 years. And so our middle level buildings have been able to use second steps for 3 years. And knowing that grant was going to be up, last year we started the conversation of a 612 SEL and really leaned into our middle level administrators to discuss, do we want to stick with second steps? Is it something that's worked? And I think what we found is that while second steps provided some great opportunities and filled a gap, it wasn't something that we felt like we wanted to purchase sort of 612 universal, that we wanted to explore other options. And so we opened up an RFP. And got, I think, Dr. Segan, correct me if I'm wrong, 21 or 22 responses because we knew that there was a potential for it to be a significant contract and wanted to make sure that we stayed in that RFP process. And so from that, there was Dr. Segan assembled a team of 11 staff members. And those 11 staff members reviewed all of the RFP paperwork that was submitted for each vendor. They then went through and scored it. And then based on those collective scores, it ranks them. So they score individually, and then they bring it all together to come up with the ranking. And they brought in the top 5 vendors for the ranking to complete in-person interviews. I think they were in person, and she'll correct me if I'm wrong. With that team. And so from those interviews, then the team decided that Character Strong was the one that rose to the top for them. There was a big gap between Character Strong and the next program that was offered in regards to second place. And so that's sort of how we got here with that process. This is a 3-year contract, so it's spliced in the 3 years. And I think years 2 and 3 are just for the licensing, and then year 1 includes the licensing and professional development that's offered to staff members at the building level and at the district level. So at this time, we'll take questions, and Dr. Segan will help field those questions for us.
So I'm curious, since there is such a big gap, I was just looking at the scoring summary that was provided to the board. Since there is such a big gap, what was the consensus around why this program was so far superior to the others?
I think once we all came together with our decision, we all just had chosen Character Strong as our preferred vendor. Once all of the presentation took place with all 5 vendors, I think we, and Dr. Herzog was involved in that process with myself as well as other administrators, counselors, and teaching staff. And so we were excited about this program. We felt like it could become a part of the culture of the building, that they would become a Character Strong building. The lessons were very relevant and engaging for students and for staff. There was little prep involved. They put a lot of forethought into the development of those sessions. And it was nice because it was 6 through 12 versus the second step program at the time was just K-8. And so we knew that we could not continue on with our partnership with them. And so everybody in the rooms just had consensus. And of course, the scoring took place before we had our interviews with them. So they shined with regards to what we were asking in the RFP process. And we all scored them individually, so we did not discuss our scoring. And so it just so happened that we had consensus on the scoring and then consensus on the decision-making once we had those interviews in place as well.
Okay. I can't really, there's a part of the scoring that's cut off, and maybe you can tell me what this says. It says evidence of experience and then it's cut off. Do you know what that other piece is evaluating?
I can look into that really quickly.
Sorry to put you on the spot. I just can't read it, so I don't know what that value represents.
You're fine. Any other questions while I'm looking that up? It might take me just a moment.
Sure. So was, I mean, it kind of relates to this question because I'm wondering if evidence of efficacy was part of that. Did the group of 11 read any studies or evaluate evidence-based results from the program?
They had several references. All of the vendors had references to validate the efficacy of the program. And so we checked into those references. There were some school districts in Missouri that we were able to reference who used the programming. And they have an entire study that I'm actually in the middle of digging into about the efficacy. They're a fairly newer program. And so, but they still have data that shows that the program improved behavior expectations, that discipline went down. They had a number of data points that showed that the program was effective.
So I know you said you're still working through the study. So if you prefer, we can have this conversation at the board meeting. But I'll just ask, what did you think about, or what do you think about the study being conducted between the timeframe of October 2019 and May 2020, overlapping with COVID?
So, and Dr. Segan, I can jump in here because I've had a chance to review the study. And I think, what you see with the data was that their pre-assessment data or their pre-data, they had a lot more subjects compared to the same subjects that they used in the post data due to COVID, but they still had enough to ensure that their study was statistically significant. And when they compare sort of the study size to the significance level, and I think they use hedges to determine their significance level, it is still statistically significant, even though there was a decrease in participation due to COVID, or a decrease in them getting, how do I say this, getting pre-data and post-data from the same participant. So those are the only, in order to include a participant in their study data, they had to complete the pre and the post. And so that limited just due to COVID. But I will say in regards to implementing programs and processes in that year in COVID, we actually in our district implemented second steps and ordered caring school community in that year during COVID too. So I know that they may not have had the population sample size that they originally started with, but it's still statistically significant.
I think we might agree to disagree, but that's okay. We can talk about it in the board meeting, because I think I think this conversation about whether the study proves efficacy is probably subject to some level of interpretation and debate. And I don't want to have that debate without the other 6 board members here, because I think their opinions need to weigh in as well. And I don't want to take up the whole time talking about that. So, but yeah, I would love to have further dialogue about this tomorrow night. But thank you for your responses. I appreciate it. And the information you provided from the board packet is very helpful. So thanks.
I'm happy to clarify too. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was going to jump in and just let you know that that particular area of scoring on the score sheet that was cut off is reference of experience and references with similar accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I found that as well.
References and experience.
Yes. Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to say, Krista. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I was glad that you found it as well.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to item 1.05, Hoydell, update of fuel master equipment. Mr. Maples couldn't be with us this afternoon, so I will cover this for him. Our transportation department monitors all fuel usage, not just for school buses, but any other district vehicle, lawnmowers, weed eaters, anything that consumes fuel. We monitor that usage. And this system is roughly 20 years old. This is updating the current system and providing us with the RFD cards, which really aren't cards, they're more like fobs. So employees will have a fob, they will fob the equipment, gather the fuel they need, and then that information will be collected. We use this information for tracking fuel usage by individuals, as well as tracking fuel by departments, as also for usage within the school district. Are there any questions about this item?
Did you say that this was replacing something existing, or is this new? I'm sorry if I am asking you to repeat it.
No, that's fine. Our current system is the Fuel Master system. We've had it for a number of years, almost 2 decades, and now this is just updating our current
Okay,
system.
Gotcha.
The change.
Sorry, I was reading and listening to you at the same time. Sometimes that doesn't always work out. So yeah, thanks.
That's not a problem. The changeover will take about half a day. They're just taking one piece off and putting one piece on.
Okay. I assume they're pleased with this system that they have. So okay. Yes. Great. Thank you.
Moving on to 1.06 JEJ signage at I believe it's at Lee Summit High School. And so we'll turn it over to Dr. Herzog.
So this item is essentially a culminating project in the construction on the exterior of the building. Several things moved location during the construction. So to finalize that, we are asking for this amount to purchase new signage, directional signage on the exterior of the building.
Any questions regarding this item? All right, moving on to 1.07, synthetic student device repair services level agreement. And I think I see Ms. Wooderson on here.
And I'm on here too if you'd like me to answer questions, or Kenzie if you want me to take it.
Go for it.
Yeah, so Synetic, under our elementary Chromebook lease contract, included in those services were milk run services. So they come once a week. They pick up any damaged devices or any devices that need warranty work. They take them to North Kansas City, they repair them, and they bill Lenovo directly. Sometimes though, we'll get a device that was damaged, not through accidental damage, but it would be deemed as negligence on the part of the student. This contract covers the cost of those repairs because those would not be covered under accidental damage or warranty. An example of that damage might be if a student picks the keys off the keyboard or maybe etches their name in the outside case. So those damages are typically billed back to the family because they are negligent. And I asked our tech team before we submitted this to the board, we average maybe 4 or 5 a month. And that would be on the high side as far as damages that generally aren't covered by our accidental coverage.
Thank you, Dr. Whaley. Are there any questions for Dr. Whaley? All right, thank you. Moving on to 1.08, Marzano personalized competency-based learning. Dr. Berger?
Yes, absolutely. So as we know, we are working through the competency-based learning process that Marzano's PCBL work in alignment with our Success Ready Student Network efforts. We've done quite a bit of work this year with teams working on the curriculum, headed towards proficiency skill development next year. What we know is that year 2 of the 3-year process is the process in which we begin the professional development with our staff. That professional development is going to consist of mostly done in-house. I and Dr. Janeway are going to be conducting 5 days of professional development that we lead. And then there'll be an additional 5 days that are led by curriculum specialists. But we do feel like there is a need for one piece that we just don't have the expertise, which is really the nuts and bolts of using proficiency scales instructionally in the classroom. So teachers will pair with Lindsay Troutman from Marzano in their content area with their newly revised curriculum and the new proficiency scales, and we'll have time with the expert on how their teaching can be impacted and be easier and more efficient the following year utilizing the scales. So this contract is to bring her in and provide that supplement to the work that we're doing with our in-house PD towards this 3-year plan.
Thank you, Dr. Barger. Are there any questions? All right, thank you. We're moving on to section 2, finance. Mr. Holder.
Good afternoon, everyone. The first item that we have is our fund transfer from the general fund to our special revenue fund for February, and that amount this month is $3,169,427.19. Any questions on that?
All right, moving on to item 2.02.
Okay, the first thing that we'll start with is our revenue and expense report. This is for the month ended February, which seems kind of odd since here we are on March 27th. We're almost finished with March, but this is a reflection of the first 8 months of our fiscal year. So just about exactly 2/3 of the way. So when we look at, we'll start with revenue up at the top. We'll look at our operating revenue. As we've talked about the past couple of months, we are trending a little bit short of where we were at this point last year. We know that We continue to monitor our Jackson County property tax collections as those come in. And then the other item here, which I mentioned at our work session earlier this month, is that we do have an early childhood special education reimbursement that we will be receiving. We may not receive it until April, actually, so I may be bringing this up again next month. But that is a little over $1 million in Fund 1 in the operating fund as well. And I will just note that, we're about 3.29% behind where we were at this point last year, but in January that was actually 4.04. So we actually closed the gap a little bit, even though we did not have that ECSC reimbursement. Moving over to the special revenue fund, you'll see we're actually tracking very closely to where we were at this point last year, but the same caveat applies, and it's even more of a caveat because actually in the special revenue fund, we have over $3 million that we are due to receive from the state that, again, last year we received in February. So as we go through, we'll continue to monitor that, but the special revenue fund is actually looking very well compared to what was budgeted in revenue. Debt service, again, we're close to where we were, but local tax collection is going to have the largest impact on debt service. We also have a little bit of revenue that came in, state assessed railroad and utility, that we receive in March, and so that will be reflected next month when we look at this. Bond fund, again, continues to trend very well, even though our interest amounts are getting lower each month. We've still exceeded the revenue projection there. And then our capital projects fund, that's been bolstered really by a strong merchants and manufacturing revenue that comes in February. So you saw, compared to January, that amount has jumped up quite a bit. And we're actually trending, we're a little bit over 11 million as it exists right now in our capital projects revenue. Again, state assessed railroad and utility bolsters that a little bit. So we're in good shape there with our Fund 4 revenue. Then moving across to nutrition services, we continue to monitor this. At this point in the year, I don't think that we will meet our $10.88 million revenue projection. But as we get closer to June, we'll decide where we need to have that revenue adjustment. Looking at activities, our revenue again is down to compared to last year, but as we look down at the expenses, we'll see the same trend. So that ebbs and flows, and so really what you want to look for there is that your revenues are not wildly exceeding or wildly under what you predicted as compared to expenses, and that's certainly not the case right now. And then BASS, again, our revenue, we are trending to be possibly a little bit short of the $1.5 million in revenue. But then again, as we compare it to the expenses, the trend is fine because our expenses are trending less than we were at this point last year and less than they are compared to our current revenues. So going down to the expense side, as we look at operating, again, we've monitored this. We made an adjustment in January. We are running a little bit hot in our operating fund expenses. Not overly concerning. You're looking at 1.1% as compared to this point last year. There are things that come in and out every month, but as we get closer, as we get to the end of April, as we're talking about this in May, and then of course, certainly in June, at the June is where we would make an amendment at the June meeting in whether or not we need to raise this. I would anticipate we probably will need to raise our expense budget in Fund 1, the operating fund at this point. How much? I don't think will be an extremely large amount compared to the overall budget of $96.6 million, but we'll continue to watch that as we go through. Our special revenue fund is actually trending almost exactly where it was at this point. last year, and it is coming in as we anticipated. So I'm hopeful that, again, as we get into May and June, we'll know, but we'll hope to leave the special revenue fund right where it is in terms of expenses. And as I mentioned a few weeks ago at our work session, I do feel pretty good about where our special revenue fund revenues are as compared to operating fund. And so if we do experience a shortfall in the predicted revenue of operating, combined with maybe we have to raise our budgeted expenses a little bit, I feel like the special revenue fund will balance that out. I feel like more revenue in the special revenue fund, and expenses tracking where we would anticipate them to be, will help balance that out. And remember, when you look at our operating fund balance, those two funds are actually combined in the ASBR when the state looks at it. So that's why that's significant. Debt service expenses, those are tracking right where we anticipated they would be. Remember, those are all out the door at this point, with the exception of a few admin fees that may come in, and those are literally in the hundreds of dollars, not thousands. So we're tracking where we would anticipate being. And then bond funds, continuing to try to spend those funds. You've heard me say this multiple times, trying to get those out the door by June 30th, because that means we're wrapping up those projects. So we continue to monitor those every month. And then our capital projects, will vary, and we still have a couple large ticket items. The MIC lease, the main part of that will come out, should come out actually before April 1st. And then just a few other project items that will come out of capital projects. But really overall, when you look at the trend of our expenses versus where our revenues are at, we feel pretty good about where we're at in relation to the capital projects fund. And at the January meeting, we did raise that threshold a little bit for expenses. So we certainly look to be meeting that at this point. Looking at nutrition services, again, I said revenues were down, but our expense levels are down as well as compared to what was budgeted. So overall, we're doing okay in nutrition services. Activity, again, fewer expenses as a percentage compared to last year. That mirrors our revenue, and the same with BASS. So as we go down and look at those restricted funds and our current fund balance, you'll notice that nutrition services is actually a little bit higher than it was at this point a year ago. But keep in mind, we had some revenues that came in a little bit later last February, and actually came in March. So that will turn around a little bit probably next month. So it's good to see, but we just need to recognize that that trend will not continue as we go through the last 4 months. Activity is a little bit higher. Again, that'll probably balance out as we get into June. And then before and after school services, I do want to highlight again the progress that we've made here. 2 years ago, you can see where it was last year. It's over $692,000 that we were in arrears. Looking 2 years back, so February of 2022, we were $931,000 in the red. So we have made significant progress that continues to bear fruit of that decision that was made back in 2021. And we really trend towards being in the black again in our before and after school services fund. Overall, if you look at our current fund balance, $124,000, you see there we're just a couple $100,000 in terms of money in the bank operating compared to where we were last year. But remember, there's a little less than $5 million that was present last year because of the ECSE reimbursement that we don't have at the same point this year. So as we go through, we should continue to see that bounce back. If we don't get the ECSE from DESE in March, which, obviously we only have 2 more days to get that, then that will roll over to April. But we'll recognize that and, of course, point that out at our finance committee meeting in April if that's not the case. Any questions on the revenue and expense report?
Mr. Holder, thank you. Moving on to section 3, facilities. Kyle Gorell will take this section. I do want to, Mr. Gorell, before we get started here, item 3.01 and 3.02. I just want to talk generally about those just real quick. The work that's being presented
Dr.
to,
Shelton,
yeah,
sorry
yes.
to interrupt, but I think Nathan still needs to finish the
Oh.
investment report and some of the
Oh.
other things. Sorry. I know
No.
he didn't want to interrupt you, so I took the
Hey,
bullet. Sorry.
Thank you so much. And we would not want to neglect the investment report. So we will go back to that. Thank you. Mr. Holder, I apologize for interrupting.
That's all right. You told me you were going to do that if I talked too long on the revenue and expense report. So
Not at all. Not at all.
no. So looking at the investment report, there's really just a couple things I want to highlight. If you look at the top of that report, again, I've mentioned this before, but I think it bears repeating. You see those interest rates that are coming off the next few months, and even as we go into next fiscal year, which is after July 1st, some real opportunity there. The market is in a unique place because of the Fed's, recent announcement that they're holding interest rates, but they still anticipate 3 cuts to come in this calendar year. So we're really, we're watching that. We're looking to lock in some rates, which means probably passing on some callable securities and taking some securities that will lock in the rate for a 3, 4, or 5 year period. Callables have been very tempting, and we've purchased some callables as over the last 6 months to a year, just because they've been offering a decently higher interest rate than those locked in securities. But we feel like this is the time to probably go ahead and lock those in. Plus, it gives us some stability, because when there's a quarterly call, some of them even have a monthly call. There's a turnaround that's involved with that each time that happens. But overall, very positive on the investment side. You can see where we're at with the liquid. Again, a lot of times that's just a reflection of where we're at this point in the year, but still over 5%, compared to where we were 18 months, 2 years ago, is a very positive thing for the budget. Then the bond fund, just highlight that at the bottom, that 8.5 million, that'll come down a little bit as we get to the end of March. But those are the funds that we're really trying to liquidate as we move to close out these bond projects. Any questions on the investment report?
I have one, well, maybe two, really quick. So for the funds that that matured in, I don't know, 10 days ago or so, are you thinking that we're going to be able to get over 5% on whatever you're going to reinvest in, like some of these that were recently done in January and February?
Yeah. So if you look at what we purchased, let's see, our most recent purchase date, find a 24. So yeah, our most recent ones that we had in January and February were all over 5. But all 3 of those are callable. So as an example, because you see that we had one that expired March 15th. So that has obviously already passed. Mm-hmm. We locked that in. I'm going off the top of my head, but I think it was 4.80 or 4.85, but that was non-callable. So that just kind of shows you the variance of a callable versus a non-callable, but we went ahead and took that. So just below 5, but still, as compared to the 0.25 that
right.
was at, we thought it was a good move.
Still pretty good. For just shifting to the bond funds, I know there's a timeline on when we have to have all of that money spent. So are we close to that deadline? Are we going to be good with regard to those funds?
Yeah, we certainly hope so. I mean, that's why we're working so hard to spend them. We know that we are in a positive arbitrage situation because we've earned so much interest. But what we have that we think will help this, and Gilmore and Bell is working with us, because the first 18 months where we borrowed the largest piece of this, which it was all the same bond issue, we received next to no interest for that time period. So we're hopeful that when you balance that out, we'll be in a situation where, the amount that we would owe would not be a significant amount, if any, on the arbitrage. The one thing that, and as soon as we know that, we'll definitely communicate that to the board. But the one thing to note there is that would actually be due in December of 2026, if that was the case. So it's not something that's an immediate, and if we do, then it's simply because we maximize the potential investment that we had available, so unfortunately, that's something that is out of our control as it pertains to the federal regulations with the IRS. We have actually been talking about promoting that with our congressional leadership, because I think the last thing they probably want is for school districts to have to send money back in that respect, right? But those are the current rules that we operate in.
So
Well,
that's
remember, it's like I'll also add that the biggest number that's usually you have to watch is that we have to spend 85% of it within 3 years, 36 months of receiving the funds. And that's kind of why we did the two tranches, one in 2020, the other set in 2021. And so we're going to be just fine in that. That's usually the one people have to watch.
Yeah. Okay.
And Mr. Gorell is working hard with our vendors to get those pay apps in. We have a couple of vendors who still need to forward those documents to us so we can process payment.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. The last item that we have is just the balance sheet. And I'll just highlight there at the bottom, I want to highlight our debt service fund. We're a little bit behind in terms of our revenues, but we know that over 99% of our expenses have went out the door already in this fiscal year. So we still have a decent balance in our debt service fund after all payments. And we know that really all we'll be getting at this point is revenue. The same with the capital projects. Because our revenues are a little bit more than we budgeted, our expenses are in line. Now, we still know that we do have some larger ticket items, but we're hopeful that, we may be able to exceed projections, because the last budget amendment, we were dropping below $10 million in the capital projects fund. So with the budget transfer, and before we make that transfer, we will go below 10 million this year. But then after the transfer, we're hopeful that we can get back above that. Any other questions on the balance sheet? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holder. Now moving on to Section 3, facilities. Item 3.01 and 3.02. I just want to talk generally about them before we talk specifically about them. These two items are requesting the board to approve design services for Greenwood Elementary and Missouri Innovation Campus so that we can be shovel ready in the event, in hopes that the voters approve the 25 bond. This is practice that we've followed in the past. It's common practice with school districts to have some projects that are ready. The price tag for this design work is over $5 million. About, I think, 3.6 or so will be spent before we would start any projects. We also plan to, and we're allowed to, as part of the bond paperwork in 25, do a reimbursement resolution, which allows us to look back 18 months. And that would allow us then to recoup and reimburse ourselves for this cost. So I think there are some questions about this. Yes, this is a cost that the district will incur. Most of it will be budgeted in FY25, so it won't come out of this fiscal year. And in hopes of the board, of our voters approving the question, the ballot in 25, then we'd be able to recoup these funds at a later date. Generally, and once again, we won't talk specifically, but generally do you have any questions about this approach to be shovel ready for future bond projects, these two bond projects?
I was the one who asked the question, so thank you.
And they're great
Um,
questions.
I was the one who asked, but I don't have really any other questions. I completely understand the rationale behind it. It's just that sticker shock, and just knowing that dollar value is such a significant portion of $22 million that we have in capital projects.
Right.
Just that concern to make sure that we have it needs, you know, just making sure there's no holes in roofs that go by the wayside or something crazy like that.
But we will build it into the 25 budget. And you mentioned roofs, the next couple of items are roof. Well, one of the future items, roofing contracts, which is going to be over $7 million. And we'll once again build that into it. Now, some of that will come out of this fiscal year because we'll begin the work before June 30th and probably get invoices before that. But then most of it will take place in 25. But we'll build that into the budget. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. I just want to talk generally about these next two items, and then we can talk specifically about it here in just a moment. So 3.01 Insight Design Studio contract, Mr. Gorell.
Right, thank you. So if you'll remember, the board in September approved 3 architects to be used for our bond projects. Insight Design was on a series of the elementaries. Dake Wells, which you're not seeing this month, was for the Pleasant Lee campus. And Multi-Studio, which was formerly Gould Evans, is on Lee Summit North and Missouri Innovation Campus. Of course, all those projects still, the remaining ones need to be vetted through CAC and through the rest of the year. Will then eventually come to the board late fall next year for recommendation. So this contract is a lump sum contract that or both of these contracts. If it's okay, I'll just talk about them both together. They comprise of all services required to design, engineer, and survey and do all of the work on the project up through a 1-year warranty period after it's complete. And so we asked our architects to approach this in a little bit different way. Some of you may be familiar with just kind of percentage-based fees, and that's how industry has handled a lot of design services for a long time. But we're just not comfortable with that methodology anymore with the escalation in construction cost. And so I did ask each one of the firms to provide a breakdown of the anticipated hours that would be spent per phase of design. And so we can equate that and just kind of get our minds comfortable with the amount of staffing and resources that they're applying to the project, and kind of let the percentage side of it just be, something that comes later. Really doesn't matter what the percentage. We're just looking for good service, make sure they've got the project covered to be a success. So these are actually not even the first proposals we got from them. We kind of had to talk around some things, and we had some fees reduced too. So we felt good about that dialogue. So as Dr. Shelton mentioned, by looking at that hourly expense, we've kind of anticipated between 2/3 and 3/4 of this expense would be incurred up through the bidding process. The remainder would be for construction administration. And so, and that is something that we have done in the past. I can honestly say 2020 was a little different because of the pandemic and our schedules were all off. We were in a little bit of a rush. I was here for like Summit Point, Sunset Valley. Both of those elementary schools had design or construction contracts awarded at the same month as the board meeting that the bond referendum was approved. So it is a risk, but I can say that the advantages for the district are, one, it sets you up for a good start to construction. We have a good 6 to 8 months to get started with projects before the heavy weather of winter sets in. And that is a tremendously valuable. Starting a project in the fall or even in the winter is very problematic. And the other part of this is that, as you're seeing, it's a very long process to design and construct a project. And that is the reason why a lot of districts get in trouble with arbitrage that we just talked about and the difficulty in spending their funds in a timely way. And you don't want to have to draw out your bond sale over too long of a period of time. We need to, we need to act quickly. The community approves a big bond issue. It's nice to just get things done and get it going. So we appreciate the consideration of getting this started early on. So without getting into any more granular detail, I'll be glad to share. I'll be glad to just answer any questions you might have about the details.
I really like what you had them do with this breakout. When I looked at that, I thought that was really helpful information just to kind of see where all the dollars land. I just have one question. I was curious, the 8.5%, is that like their fee? Is that Insight or Multi-Studio? Is that their fee for kind of the collaboration that they're doing by pulling all these people together?
That's the total design fee.
Oh, is it a percentage of
Design.
the estimated project cost? Is that how that? Because it said 8.5%. You see what it's on page 2.
I see why that's confusing. Yes, we had an estimated construction cost. So it's the total design fee as a percentage of that total construction cost.
Okay. I understand now.
So that's not how their fee is being determined, but it's once they go through this process of determining number of hours they need for the phases of the project, that's what it turns out to be.
Okay.
Turns out to be about 8.5% of the estimated cost.
Okay.
Am I stating that correctly?
No, I think you're good. I understand what you're saying. In my head, I'm just sitting here thinking, okay, is there an advantage to coming in for them to come in under the 28 million? Just trying to see if they're still keeping budgetary considerations in mind and things like that. I'm sure they are. Just when I, see that a fee is a percentage of the estimate, it does make me curious. Do you see kind of what I'm getting at? That maybe there's an incentive to like not reduce the potential cost of a project?
Yeah, and I was trying to explain this earlier that we did not ask them to use a percentage of the construction cost as a basis for generating their fee. We looked at what the scope of the project would be. We know we're going to have, we would plan on X number of square foot of new space, new construction. Greenwood needs a cafeteria that's on grade. They needed a gym that's the correct size, those types of things. So new space, and then we told them you're going to design and renovate an amount of space in the existing building. And so you go out and figure out how many hours of time you need to do that work. And so that's what generated the hours by phase to a dollar amount. That amount of work just happens to be 8.5%.
Gotcha. Okay, I understand. I see. Okay,
Yeah.
so I get it. That's just what the number wound up being, but it was not, this is your fee. Okay,
Right.
I get it now.
I
I
Now
understand.
I'll be honest with you, that's how it happened a lot in the past. Somebody's building a new elementary school, it's going to be $30 million. They would come in and just say, okay, it's a 6% fee. And that's just how you did it.
Yeah. Just kind of like this is my flat rate calculated.
Right.
Well, the hour breakdown that's in this document, I was looking at the Insight one, is very helpful just to kind of understand the scope of what's actually involved, because it is a lot of work. I know Greenwood's going to be a very complicated renovation and new construction combination. So I'm really excited to see how that one comes out in the end, but the whole process is going to be, it's probably going to be a journey.
It will be a journey.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So do we want to talk about 3.02 as well. Once again, generally, it's the same type of work. It's just set aside, and the process was the same at the Missouri Innovation Campus as well. Do you have any questions about 3.02? All right, moving on to 3.03 roofing contracts.
All right, the aforementioned roofing scope. And just for just some perspective, the district has about 2.5 million square feet of roofing asset, and we use benchmark roofing consultants. They are professional engineers. They help inspect and manage our long-range roofing plan, and they're just an invaluable consultant for us. And so with that 2.5 million square feet of roofing, in today's dollars, if we're not spending somewhere in the range of $4 million a year on roofing, we're getting behind. And that is to keep our roofs at about a 25-year lifespan. So, we had a couple of years during the pandemic where, if you guys will remember, you couldn't get roofing materials. So we got a little bit behind, we're playing a little bit catch up. So that's part of the reason for this large project. It did happen that Lee Summit High and Mason were both, in the last bond issue and also kind of next in line on our roof management plan. At the time we were planning those projects, we were just not comfortable with the extent of coordination that was going to take to throw a huge roofing project on top of all of the renovation that was going on inside of the building. And so we have to look at how that works with our, the potential future bond issue projects too. So we did want to just get those projects done and then come back in and roof. There is a lot of cleanup on these buildings when it comes to old equipment and roof penetrations, and we have to re-insulate the roofs, which is a great thing, but creates a lot of construction, if you will, just to insulate and do these types of old building roofing projects. So we divided this up into multiple areas just to we knew it was a lot of work for any given contractor to try to take on in a summer. And we tried, if you remember our last big roofing project, because materials weren't available, we gave the option to do work during the school year. And frankly, it was rough. It's just hard to schedule. They worked in the evenings, and we ran into some difficulties with that. So really wanted to try to get back into our summer phasing for roofing. So this project was bid through cooperative purchasing. So we went out to, roofing is now a big thing with cooperative purchasing. So we went out to a group of roofing contractors that, it's just the typical group that bids a lot of schoolwork. We had great turnout. We had 6 people submit bids, 5 of which were met our bid qualification requirements. And we did receive 3 bids on each one of these areas of scope, which honestly is better than we've done in years. A lot of times we're good just to get a couple of bids. And so we separated out Lee Summit High A and B building, and then Mason is a separate project. And you see there, just 3 good sized projects for these companies. We just kind of got lucky that the low number on each one of them was a different contractor. So that's going to let us get this work done this summer. These guys are all comfortable with the staffing. Flynn Midwest was just off of one of the really big projects of here in the metro area, the big plants that are getting built. And so they had some staffing that they could throw at a project too. So as Dr. Shelton mentioned earlier, this is $7.8 million, just under that. And we will be planning for that in our capital budget. So are there any other questions I can answer?
So are all of the alternates being completed in this process as well? Because there's alternate bid 1 through 6, or are they just doing the base?
There was, the alternates that were highlighted, are the ones that we're awarding.
They're not huge values, but I was just curious
Yeah.
if they were doing all that extra stuff too. The other stuff, the other alternates that are not being completed, is that just what's the reasoning for not doing the not highlighted alternates?
There are, some of those were associated with, roof sections at Lee Summit High that we're not doing right now. So we did not award the full scope. If you'll notice on those bid tabs, there were some other roof sections at Lee Summit High School that we'll plan to do in the summer of 25.
Okay, but
So some of
nothing,
those-
obviously nothing urgent that's gonna need immediate attention,
Mhm,
I assume.
no,
Okay.
no.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, moving on to section, agenda item 3.03.
Thank you. First of all, a big thank you to Ms. Sharon Garcia for figuring out how to fix this report. You know, as we've talked about numerous times, this is a tremendously complex report. I don't know if anybody else has ever tried with their technology department to get something like this to work, but this report pulls in 5 fiscal years of bond data all into one easy to read report. And along with the back end of that comes with a lot of complications. And as you remember, for about the last 6 months, we've had some encumbrance issues that didn't get drawn down. So we have got the big ticket items fixed on this. So the bottom line of this report is relatively close to where we truly are. There are a few other small encumbrance items out there, but we feel pretty comfortable in ending up, you know, somewhere around $2 million at the end of the day, the end of this bond issue, which for, you know, starting a bond issue at the beginning of a pandemic, we feel really good about, and delivering the scope and then some, and the projects that we've added for the same bond budget. So that being said, I'll be glad to answer any questions if you have any.
All right, moving on to agenda item 3.05. I asked Mr. Gorell just to talk us through as we are planning for the pre-K program, and as we're going to do some renovations and some improvements and modifications to 9 classrooms at Prairie View Elementary, as well as some other space there. Just talk about that process, because we are talking about, you know, I'm just going to throw a general number out. Let's just call it $400,000 worth of improvement to that space. Just wanted him to talk about how we're going to go about that, because we have a very short turnaround time to make that happen. But we also want to balance that with following our procurement processes and procedures so that we don't fall outside of what our normal practices are. So Mr. Gorell, talking to us about the process and then how that marries with our current procurement process policies.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be glad to. So every year we, obviously we just talked about, we approve a capital budget. And so in the facilities budget review meeting, I'll be meeting with Steve and Nathan here pretty soon to talk through all the budget categories that we need to fund for next year and talk through where we ended up this year. And so, you know, it's everything from roofing and paving and flooring and all those budget categories that we manage year to year. So we have a number of contracts that we use in our department to implement that work. Typically it's, you know, in the spring, it's about this time when we get our capital budgets kind of locked in, or at least have a good idea of what we're going to do for the following year. And so we have contracts that are board approved for, say, flooring, for example. Every 4 years, we bid a flooring contract, and we have a square foot price that we use to do all of our summer flooring. And so the form of our agreement with them is just issuing a purchase order. So we issue a lot of purchase orders in the summer for those maintenance categories that are through previously approved contracts or, other cooperative purchasing. And so we just do that within the budget that's been approved. And that's really how we handle a lot of that little one-off small capital. I say small capital. Some of the things are big. How we handle those every year. Now, you will notice in facilities, a lot of times we do bring contracts to you. So we know that by state law, the board is the only one who can approve a contract for a school district. So if there is a document that needs to be signed, or we have a contract that needs to be implemented that's new, we will bring that to the board and have that approved. So that's just kind of a quick explanation of how we handle that. I'll be glad to answer any clarifying questions if you'd like.
So generally, the scope of work that we're going to do there is work that we would typically do throughout the district. We're going to tie that into existing contracts and agreements that we have already in place, using existing budgeted funds to get the work done.
Right.
So would this be considered light renovation work? Nothing that's going to be a significantly major redesign of space, like no moving walls or anything like that?
I would consider it light renovation. We're actually not even going to paint the rooms. We are going to we are going to expand the hard flooring area. Preschool, they just need a larger area, about probably a third, maybe even as much as half of the classroom in a preschool classroom is a hard area, so we can clean it up for their activities. So that will be one piece of work. A couple of the classrooms are going in a space that was formerly used by special ed programs at Prairie View. And so we do need to take a couple of walls down and build those. It's not anything major, but we do have a couple of walls to put up just to create 2 classrooms out of some other jumbled up space. We're also going to look at some casework improvements, get their classroom casework kind of up to a standard and work that in along with the furniture for teacher storage.
I would say the casework is going to be a delayed process as we have to order the casework. There's quite a bit of work already in the system and then getting their installer. So that's something that may not even happen next school year.
So I know a lot of pre-K rooms, typically like the kindergarten rooms, have bathrooms. Are the classrooms that are being used for pre-K, are they already fitted with restrooms? Is that in the plan or not part of the plan?
They're in close proximity to a bathroom. We did have long discussions about that. We think that the existing location of the bathroom will work along with the staffing. So each classroom, as you may recall, has a teacher and 1.5 paras, which will allow staffing to help the pre-K students use the restroom, and of course scheduling that as a classroom as well, classroom break. But at this point, they won't have individual bathrooms. We will monitor that, and in the future, and we may need to make that addition or that modification renovation in the future.
Yeah.
So
I look forward to hearing the teachers' feedback about how many times they go to the bathroom with their 3 and 4-year-olds outside the room.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I would say, and you may be aware of this, there's a grant that we are applying for. It'll give us $50,000 per classroom to equip classrooms, and that's renovations, furniture, curricular materials, whatever that may be. And so we've applied for that grant. It's a pretty simple, streamlined process. So we're hoping that will be approved for $450,000 of grant funds to equip these classrooms. We can use to that advantage.
Great. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Gurrell, thank you so much. And then the last item we have today, 4.01, future agenda items. Once again, this is an agenda item just to give you an idea what's coming. There are a few items that we need that are going to come this month, and they'll fall off of this list. And there are a couple other items I think that probably need to be taken off as well. So this is just for your reference. I I do know the audit RFP was open today, and so that'll be coming probably in April. We got a big project going on at Lee Summit High School with the reconfiguration of 291 and the 50 interchange and what that means to our space and our parking lot there. We did the roof contract today, or this week. In April, we'll bring Bernard Campbell Middle School mechanical replacement contract, which will be a large contract also. So this is just to highlight a few of the items that are coming your way. Are there any questions about items on this list? All right, and next month, Mr. Gurrell will have not only we'll have not only this item, but also we'll have the summer project list. And so, Mr. Gurrell, if you recall, last summer we started a list of all the projects that are taking place this summer, and by building, and we'll have that ready for next month, and we'll have that for April through August or so, just so we can track the projects that we plan to do this summer. It's a long list. We do a lot of work in the summertime.
Yep. We'll get a list together. Right.
All right. Are there any further questions as we wrap this meeting up?
No questions, but I just wanted to say thank you to everybody in this call for being flexible. I know this meeting moved, and full transparency, that was my fault. So I just appreciate your time and your preparation for the meeting. I really appreciate everything that you put into this. So thank you.
You're very welcome. We enjoy doing it. All right. Well, that concludes our Finance Committee meeting for March 27th, 2024. Thank you for attending.